When you first arrive at Tent Rocks and you're parked at the parking area and look up at the cliffs, you can see why the local indigenous people, the Kris-speaking Indian tribes at Cochiti and San Felipe and Santo Domingo, all refer to this place as Kashakatui, which stands for White Cliffs. The light-colored layers include very white volcanic tuff layers and somewhat darker beige and gray layers that are of sedimentary rocks, sands and gravels that were deposited by flash floods that are intermingled among the whiter volcanic tuff layers. All of the material that one sees at Tent Rocks was deposited between about 6 and 7 million years ago, at the time when there was a field of small rhyolite volcanoes spread out across the southern part of the Jemez Mountains. And as each one erupted, it would send pumice and ash up into the air and rolling in avalanches down the hillsides to be deposited in the margins of the Rio Grande Valley, which was subsiding as a rift basin at the time. And those volcanic tuff layers are then intermingled with the sands and gravels that were being eroded off of these volcanoes and also shed down towards the Rio Grande. As you go farther up towards the Tent Rocks themselves, and most visitors going into the Slot Canyon Trail, one gets closer views of the sand and gravel layers. They range from having big boulders of volcanic rhyolite to smaller pebbles and sand grains. There are also distinctive orange bands running among the lighter colored sediment layers. And those orange bands are essentially ancient soils. They represent where there was a pause in deposition, and the accumulation of rainwater caused weathering of the iron-bearing minerals in the sediments, so that they sort of rusted and produced an orange coloration in the sediment. The Slot Canyon is most impressive as showing aspects of streams eroding downward through soft layers of rock and volcanic tuff. However, there were times in the history of the Slot Canyon when it actually filled back up in part with sand and gravel, and then incision downward began again. This is most obviously seen in the root systems that are exposed around the base of a very large ponderosa pine tree, just a short distance up the Slot Canyon. The exposed roots give some idea of how much sand and gravel had backfilled into the canyon and then was eroded out after the original pine seed germinated. You see other evidence of this cyclic alternation of erosion and deposition of sand and gravel within the canyon along the route up through the Slot Canyon. One of the reasons why this location is called Tent Rocks is because of the very conspicuous pedestals that are eroded into the sedimentary sand and gravel layers at Tent Rocks. Here we can see the origin of these pedestal rocks very clearly, where each one is capped by a very large boulder. As water runs off down the slopes of the fairly consolidated sand and gravel layers, the large boulders can't be easily dislodged by the running water, but the smaller particles of sand and smaller pebbles frequently are, so that eventually the boulder is left standing somewhat higher on the slope than the surrounding sand and gravel materials, and effectively protects the underlying smaller particles from being eroded from continued runoff. Over time, this pedestal of material that's protected from erosion rises higher and higher as the surrounding material is eroded away, with its cap rock of boulder forming the top of the pedestal. this location in the Slot Canyon, the rocks on one side of the view, here on the left, are very different than those on the right. And there's a very profound boundary that separates these two different rock types. That boundary is a fault. The rocks on the right have moved down, while the rocks on the left have moved up. This is a classic example of what geologists refer to as a normal fault, and is produced as the crust is being stretched and pulled apart. This fault is one of many that accounts for the downward movement of the Rio Grande Valley compared to the mountains that flank it. Moving into the narrowest and most spectacular part of the Slot Canyon, hikers are walking through a beautifully exposed section of the pyroclastic surge deposits. The wavy layers in the surges include features that geologists call cross-bedding. You essentially can think of these as being petrified dunes, but not in this case blown by sand as in the desert, but essentially blown by these explosive currents from the volcano. The cross-bedding in the surge deposits exposed in this narrow part of the Slot Canyon tell us that the volcanic surges were moving from the northwest to the southeast, and have helped the geologists doing research here at Tent Rocks to determine that the source volcano was about a mile to the northwest of this location. Continuing on up the Slot Canyon, hikers continue to move through the deposits of these explosive pyroclastic surges, but also get a view farther ahead to the head of the Box Canyon that they're walking up through. Most of what one sees in this area are layers of different types of volcanic eruptions. Pyroclastic fall deposits like those seen at the mouth of the Slot Canyon, just caused by ash and pumice slowly settling down out of the air, as well as the more violent pyroclastic flows and pyroclastic surges. Eventually, the trail climbs up out of the canyon through the trail along the back end of the Box Canyon that leads into the Slot. And from above, one can look back down into the Slot Canyon area itself and see beautiful views of the faults that were crossed in the canyon below. From the top of the trail, one also gets panoramic views out across the rest of the Rio Grande Valley. From this view to the east, one can see all the way to the Santa Fe Range behind the city of Santa Fe, and to the Cerrillos Hills and San Pedro Mountains farther south of Santa Fe and closer to Albuquerque. Many hikers, when they return from the Slot Canyon, choose to take a different route back towards the parking lot by taking the Cave Loop Trail. Cave Loop is named for the feature seen here, a little cavate that has been excavated by humans into one of the softer volcanic ash layers in the canyon wall. This was a human-formed excavation into the side of the wall. Archaeologists call these features cavates, where they were made by Native Americans in the past. The exact history and origin of this cavate is not well known. It clearly was used by humans because the inside roofs and walls are darkened by soot from fires that burned inside.